Hello, my name is Joshua Keith, and this is theburningcoal.com, a website dedicated to God's glory, His grace, and our response to it. Today we're going to be talking about being thankful for the prophets. And in particular, what I mean by this is the books of prophecy in the Old Testament. You see, typically in our Bibles, we divide them into the major prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, Daniel. And then you've also got the minor prophets like Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, so on and so forth. And so we've got these different books in the Bible that are about prophets coming to the people of God. Now, to kind of put this concept in perspective, I want to take a look at what Jesus says in Matthew 23:37. He says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." We see here that Jesus talks about the prophets. And one of the things that he mentions is that the prophets, while we may enjoy their writings now, they were not popular in their time. And in fact, they were killed for their message many times. And Jesus himself, being a prophet, is the reason why he was killed as well. People did not like his message as a prophet either. So Jesus follows in that same footstep. But what we have here is a mindset of what the prophets were meant to do. The prophets were sent to God's people to explain to them the covenant. And one of the things that we can be thankful for is that it shows the law in real life. Whenever we go through and we look at the prophets, what we're seeing is God has given the people the law, the 5 books of the law. He's told them how they're supposed to live. And so that's what he expects of them. But they fall short. And not just a little short most of the time, but they're falling way short. And what does that look like? Well, we see when the prophets come that we see people interacting with the prophets, and we see what they do. We see how they lived in the law. We see how they fell short. We see that they did not honor and respect God, and this was through not keeping his commands, through the way they took his sacrifices, to the way that they many times just completely forgot about him in their day-to-day lives. But on top of that, we see how the law was meant to protect people and how angry God gets, because who are the ones who are the most taken advantage of in the countries of Israel and Judah? It is the poor, it is the stranger, it is the orphan, it is the widow, those who are defenseless. God's whole purpose in the law was so that they would have protection, so that the law would be given to them and protect them from wrongdoing. Thus the idea of love your neighbor as yourself being the second greatest commandment. And so when we go back and we look at the prophets, we see what people turning away from God looks like. We also see God's judgment. We see how God responds to that. And it is not a pretty picture. God lets them know that judgment is coming. There is no doubt that God is going to avenge those who were taken advantage of, that God is going to expect the respect and honor and reverence that he deserves. And so when we look at the prophets, we see that God brought his judgment there in a temporal setting, but it also helps us to understand that, one, he will bring judgment, and two, the types of things that he cares about bringing judgment about to us in the spiritual sin as well. But notice what Jesus says, that as a hen desires to gather the chicks together, so he wanted to bring Jerusalem back. The whole point of these prophets coming was because God wanted to save them from judgment. He wanted to keep them from these terrible things happening. He wanted to restore the relationship. If God did not care about the people at all, there would have been no prophets. He would have given the law, and they would have either done it or not. But that's not who God was. That's not who God is. He is a compassionate, loving God, and his desire is to restore the relationship even when we're the ones who mess it up. And so when we look at the prophets, we see the judgment of God coming, but we see that God wants to give them a way of escape if only they'll just take it. So there's a lot of value in studying the prophets, and we are able to be thankful that God has given us this commentary of how we should live in our day-to-day lives. I hope this lesson blesses you in your walk in his kingdom.